Welcome to Rethinking Youth Ministry, where each week we hope to raise the bar for youth ministry by asking questions, interviewing thinkers, and having real honest conversations about what it looks like to lead the next generation. I am Brett, and today I am thrilled to be joined by Tom Chef Shunas.
Hey, everybody.
Otherwise known as Chef Ashley Marie Bohentz.
Hey.
Who I think we'll just refer to as Ashley
That works.
for this episode. And joining us again, we have Kurt Johnston.
Hey there.
So Kurt, if you weren't with us a couple episodes ago, is the next gen pastor at Saddleback Church, and he is hanging out with us today. And today on Rethinking Youth Ministry, we're going to be talking about this idea of structuring your ministry for growth. So as we jump into this conversation, I want to try and define some of these words that we're talking about, because when we talk about structure in ministry, it can mean 100 different things to 100 different people, and the same thing with growth. So I want to start with growth. I don't want to go too long because this could be a whole other podcast, and we've kind of talked about this before. But when we're talking today, structuring your ministry for growth, what are we talking about with growth?
I think it could be a few things. You're talking about spiritual growth. You're talking about numeric growth. We're talking about, I feel like, I hope, I could be wrong. I mean, who knows? But I feel like we're talking about the sort of growth where you need to start thinking about who does what as you grow as a ministry.
Yeah, I think that's what I first thought of. I was trying to think back of any time I've asked myself that question, like, how do I need to position us for growth? What changes do I need to make to the structure? And it's always, how can I get more people involved? How can I make more space, be more proactive rather than reactive to the growing pains you often experience in ministry?
Yeah. What about when we're talking structures in ministry? What do we mean when we're talking about that? Like the actual physical space that we're meeting in? What do you think that we're talking about?
When they were talking about different ways to frame growth, my mind went to that's such an uncomfortable conversation for youth ministry. It's a conversation that's first on our mind, especially numeric growth.
Yeah.
But it's also a conversation that we know we have to have. It's a conversation we know we have to think about. So when I think of structures for growth, I don't think we're talking physical structures.
Right.
Eventually at some point, the physical structure does impact your growth. Because
I don't know if you've ever seen the physical structure at Saddleback Church, but it's pretty dang impressive.
Brett, we're sitting across from Kurt and Chef. Like their physical structure, not
you talking
them,
personally or the
not personally? Excuse me.
I was gonna say you're welcome.
Of the ministries they led, were pretty phenomenal.
But yes, but I think we make a mistake of thinking, oh man, if I can just have that structure, then we'll grow. Man, if we just had that youth building, if we just had. Or physical structure. If we just had a church bus, think of the things we could do with a church bus. Right. And I think that's a mistake. So,
it's not how it works.
It's not how it works.
You don't get something before you need it. That's just the way it
build
goes.
It and they will
Very
come.
rarely.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's take this kind of to a really practical level. So when we're talking about structures in ministry, what are some of those systems? What are some of those structures that we're talking about that have the most impact of what the growth we're trying to see?
Yeah. Well, I think that's asking the wrong question first, because before you structure, I think the wrong question, the number one wrong question is, how do we grow?
Yeah.
Right. That's what everybody asks. Hey, so how many you running? How many you running? How you? The reason we ask that question is because we want to know how do we grow? How do we grow?
That's the best way to grow a student ministry. Free beer.
But the structures follow the strategy. So I think the first question would be, why does our ministry exist? What are we here to do? Call it a purpose statement, call it a mission statement. I have to call it a purpose statement.
You have to, contractually.
if I don't, I get in a lot of trouble.
That's right.
Ears, the listeners, they're everywhere. But once you define, like, hey, this is why our ministry exists. Because if your ministry exists to baptize 500 students a year, that's why your ministry exists. Now you're going to put different systems and structures in place than if your ministry exists to share the good news of Jesus on every public school campus in our county. If that's why you exist, now you got to put different structures in place.
Good.
So I think you got to decide, like, hey, what's the purpose? What's the mission? What's the end game of our ministry? And then you structure accordingly to help you. It's the old, you put a target and aim for the target instead of just shooting an arrow and then going and drawing a target around it.
So vision, strategy, structure? Vision,
strategy. I would say vision or purpose or mission.
Purpose. Let's go with
strategy.
purpose. Yeah.
Structure.
Okay.
And then I would add, by the way, growth is almost always somewhat of a natural byproduct if you get those three things aligned.
That is how you have to operate for growth. I mean, that growth is always a secondary benefit of doing something else right? So when I was a high school principal at a small private school, free schools down the road, terrible business model, the goal was to grow. Well, the reality was that was a terrible goal. I needed to create a great school, and then it would grow and figure out what the thing was that set us apart from the big free school down the road. I mean, there's the famous Chick-fil-A quote that we will get better. Our customers will make sure we get bigger, you know.
You should explain that story more.
Well, it was a story that I heard about Chick-fil-A years ago. I read it somewhere. I've heard several people talk about it, but really they were experiencing their first real competition. And so they were talking about how to keep up with the other organization that was competing with them. And so they were trying to figure out how to do the number of stores. And supposedly there was a moment where Truett Cathley, basically either stands up or he just smacks his fist on the table and he said, "I am tired of this conversation. Our job is to figure out how to get better. Our customers will make sure that we get bigger."
Thus, the super massive big pepper cruncher.
Yes.
You ever in there where the guy walks around the big, like the 4 foot tall pepper? He wants a pepper. That was the turning point.
Isn't that nuts? But anyway, the competitor who was trying to grow is gone. And Chick-fil-A's doing all right.
There you go. Interesting.
So, yeah.
Interesting. Well, and we all know, we've been around the block a few times, that you can grow if you just want, we just want a bunch of kids to show up. You joked earlier, free beer.
Right.
That's
there's several acceptable versions of that.
If you have money, you can grow a youth ministry because you can buy whatever you need to buy to attract kids for a little
in the short term.
Short term,
exactly.
And unfortunately, I think a lot of people, even listening to this podcast, there is that tension, there is that pressure because we all know a little bit of short term unhealthy growth kind of puts some chips in our pocket with the powers that be, and so it's really tempting to do the flashy, a little bit shallower, get some short-term growth. Right. And there's actually a place for it. I think the whole attractional side of ministry. Yeah. So going back to what your goal and how you structure, at Saddleback, we do structure. We have a massive top of the funnel. I mean, we don't give out free beer, but we do some fun, attractional stuff.
But you're using it strategically.
It's a total part of our process that gets us to our goal.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what do you think are some of the consequences? You've got the vision, you've got a strategy of where you want to go, but your structures are poor. They're not well thought out. Maybe you're a leader that just can't really think structurally, and so it's hard for you to build some of those things. What are some of the consequences in those kind of situations?
I remember several years ago, I was actually asking this exact question. The ministry that I was leading, we were transitioning from like a event-driven ministry to a small group-driven ministry. And so we figured out what our vision was going to be and what the strategy was going to be. And I remember sitting actually around a circle with you, Kurt, and you, Chef, and I was asking the question like, okay, so how do I build systems and
whose answer do you remember?
Both of you had significant influence on me.
She works for me now. The answer is Kurt. But
so I was asking the question, and I think that for me, the beginning of the journey was recognizing what systems and structures I had in place currently, because sometimes you're just so used to your normal, you don't even know what your system or structure is. And I remember asking, and Kurt, you looked at me and you said, Ashley, here's the truth. You're asking the right question, and the structure that you put in place for 50 kids is going to be the same structure that you're going to be able to work within for 200 kids in the future. Like that will position you for growth to figure out your systems and structure now. Something like that.
I'm not sure if I agree with myself.
Well, I mean, I mostly Kurt to Kurt.
Well, here's what I meant by that. How long ago was that conversation?
Years.
Okay, that's why.
Like 4 or 5.
No, but what I mean, I think what I meant then was there's a tipping point where whether it's at 50 or 60, at some point, all the thinking, all the strategy, all the time and effort it takes to run a youth ministry of 60 or 70 kids is pretty much the same as it is to run a youth ministry of 600. Maybe not at 10 or 6 kids, but at some point, that ministry of 40 or 50, you have to have structure and systems in place there. And the shell of those, or the discipline of thinking structurally and systemically, is going to help you get to the next stage. but I don't think I would have said it's going to be the exact same structures, the exact same, because they have to scale. But
Right.
the framework, I think, is, in other words, I think a youth group of 60 probably has more in common with a youth group of 600 than it does with a youth group of 10. And a lot of that is the systems in place.
Don't you think it's when it moves beyond what you can do alone? Maybe we need to start thinking structures. We need to start thinking what Peter Drucker would say is the bottom line of leadership.
For sure.
Who does what?
Yeah.
Right.
And
We have to start thinking who does what, and you have to think beyond, because when you're in a youth ministry like I grew up in, it was my dad, and it was
Right.
9 of us from 6th through 12th grade in a cinder block basement, and that was our small group and the best he could do. But as if we would have grown, which we didn't, but that didn't have anything to do with my dad. It was, it was just the reality of the
cinder
church and
block
its vision.
basement might have had something to do with
Its
it.
vision
I'm just
of what
saying.
The black mold.
Yeah.
Right.
Hey, kids, come down to the cinder block basement. Yeah, it's not.
Lots of
That
stories
really
about
wouldn't
that.
fly well.
No.
You are talking to several people in cinder block basements. So
I don't
you
even know
have
what a
one,
basement
just
is,
paint it.
technically. I've never really.
Oh, that's right. You don't have them in
California guy?
Earthquakes.
Is that
Stuff
why?
like that.
Sorry.
I don't know.
I don't know why.
Anyway, so we're back to structure. So, you're beyond what you could do on your own. You have to start thinking about who does what.
Yeah.
I think once that happens, then you've got to start thinking, and I think I agree with old Kurt, you got to start thinking in a way that, whatever we do will be what we do as we grow. The who does what may change, or the how many who's do what will change, but what is it? What are the things that we want to do? So,
And by saying old Kurt, you mean currently like I'm older,
Kurt, like
or the old Kurt from a couple years ago?
Younger Kurt or
Younger
old
Kurt or
Kurt?
old
I
Old
agree
Kurt.
with younger Kurt
It's twofold.
that talked
Back.
a long time ago,
Okay.
but I'm talking to old Kurt.
Gotcha.
Happy birthday, by the way.
And I do think, thank you.
So you're right either way there.
I like that. Yeah. But here, I think this too is, I think you're wise to think one stage ahead. So if you're 50, a lot of the systems you put in place should be systems that'll handle 75 or 100.
Right.
Like always
No, I
be
think that's
thinking
great.
the next set. And a lot of them is going to be the same, old Kurt. A lot of it's going to be the exact same.
Right.
Current Kurt says, yeah, but a lot of it's going to change because 50 and 75, there are differences.
Let me give you some North Point lore as far as how it got started. So the 6 of them sat in the basement, and they were the 6 founders of North Point, and they were dreaming about how to create a church and trying to re-envision what it looked like.
Lots of basements in your
Yeah.
life.
So they're meeting like every other week or every third week and all that sort of stuff. And, they're not growing, but they decided, let's go ahead and plan for a church of, I don't remember what number they chose, but like you said, let's go ahead and plan for a big church and figure out how we would structure it.
Right.
Right.
And then they took their 6 names and they put their names all over it, meaning they all had many jobs.
Right.
But it was a plan, it was a vision for growth,
Yep.
for what it would be someday. Like when we do get to this point, what are the jobs that are going to need to be done? Right now, it might be all your job. Or
Right.
right now, if you're wise, it's not all your job. You start to bring some volunteers
Yep.
in to help you
Yeah.
do some of those things,
Right.
and trust them with some stuff. But you are operating with the systems and beliefs and structures, even though you may be the person doing most
Yeah.
of it, that you will see as you grow years down the road.
Well, and at Saddleback, we have had the same strategy from day one. Literally from day one. It was the same strategy that we employ today. So if the strategy is part of your system, right, that's a strategy that's lasted from an apartment without a basement, but an apartment all the way up until now, 20 campuses. But some of the systems, right, some of the systems to support that strategy, to support the growth, have had to morph, and they've had to change over time.
And I think that's where some youth leaders that are listening have probably experienced some pushback with this, because we talk about, you structure for growth. And so they build some of these systems, they build some of these structures that aren't just meant to work for their 20 kids or for their 50 kids. And you've got parents that are saying, why do we have to do this now? And you get small group leaders and volunteers that are saying, wait, why are we doing this? This doesn't seem like we should have to jump through all these hoops. So is that just a vision casting thing? Then if you're that leader who's kind of getting that pushback for some of these systems that you're trying to create and people aren't catching on, what's the solution there?
I think it's largely a vision casting thing. it's vision casting / just messaging.
Yeah.
Right. So if let's just use a safety thing. You don't have to have a lot of vision to care about safety.
Right.
But if you have 6 kids in your, let's talk next gen for a minute. If you have 6 kids in your 5th grade class, a lot of parents might say, well, why do we have to check them in? Everybody knows me. I know everybody. I'll
Right.
just pick them up after church. But you go, no, we care about your child's safety, so we have a check-in procedure. Now, the beauty in that is you answer the current question, we care about your child's safety, and it scales up to 1,000 kids.
Right.
And I think there's youth ministry examples are full of that. So some of it's vision and some of it is just messaging, like, hey, no, here's why we do what we do. Such a big part of leadership is just messaging.
Yeah.
Vision to me is overrated, to be honest. I say all the time, anybody can have vision. Anybody. It's leadership is the hard work of fulfilling vision and messaging vision and getting people on board. And my son's 20. He's got all kinds of vision. He's going to be rich and have like 25 girlfriends. Yeah. He's got so much vision. All right, great. How are you going to do it? Oh, I haven't thought about that. So vision's the easy part. And so many youth pastors, I'm just the visionary.
Yeah.
I just want, they want to get a paycheck for just having vision. And I think the messaging and putting systems, it's the nitty-gritty hard work of being in the trenches and building systems and figuring out, when do we scale this? That's the tough part.
I think one of the most beneficial things I did when I was asking those questions was to go visit other youth ministries and spend time with their team, ask questions about their programming and when they're not meeting, because learning how their systems work, it was very clear to me what would never work for me and would never work for my context, and what might be a really great change I can make. And something I always tell teams I lead or teams I'm part of is like, great, healthy, growing ministries aren't 100% better than every other ministry. They're 1% better in 100 different ways. And the way that you talk about it.
That'll preach. Did she say that? That's your own thing? That's strong.
Yeah. She says that all the time. It's awesome.
Wow. That is awesome.
Yeah. So to add to that, I think a couple of things. One is, you were always so good at asking when you would come watch stuff, why? I get so many people that ask me, what do I do?
Yeah.
And there's just a difference in that question, because you're the leader. You have been entrusted with the leadership of your program to your kids. If you understand why, it may look very similar to what you saw. But why is such a better question, because at the end of the day, you may have to change the what that's done into your, because that's your ministry. And like you said, you've got to be the one to execute on vision, right? I mean, my leadership coach says leadership is a vocation. It's not a speech. It's not a gift. It's hard work. It's swinging a hammer purposefully over time to get things done. And he's, I think he's exactly right. Another thing I would say to your question, Brett, is like, what about pushback? It's change. There will be pushback. And part of your job as the leader is to weather that during pushback. Cast vision, yes. Be clear about those things. Expect people not to like it, because it's not what they're used to. And that's it. It's just not what they're used to. It's terrible, but it's what they're used to, sometimes.
And I amen that, because when I look back over my youth ministry career, I've got more regrets for the times I didn't change, the times I didn't make a move, implement a new system, because people don't like it. Way more regrets over things I didn't change than the times I did, and maybe got it wrong. Because you can always you change and get it wrong. You can always self-correct, right? But if you don't make the change, then you don't see any progress. I mean, I do think maybe just in another way of thinking about systems is that can be a scary word. Systems, and I know somebody might be going, I got a youth group of 20 kids, 25 kids. Do I really need systems? Maybe another way to think of systems would just be, what are some of the best practices, some of the habits of your youth ministry? So for us, our volunteer system is just this cycle. We just enlist, equip, empower, encourage. Enlist, equip, empower, encourage. There's not a lot. I mean, there's parts. There's nuts and bolts to each of those. But as long as somebody on our team knows our system for volunteers is just enlist, equip, empower, encourage. It's just a best practice. It's a mindset. It doesn't have to. A system doesn't have to be this massive infrastructure. It can be best practices, things you do. What do you do over and over again to help you get the results that you want?
And creating a system is, to be clear, creativity or innovation is what we learned a couple weeks back at a conference where we heard a guy talk
gosh.
about creativity, and he taught us there's creativity and then there's innovation. Innovation is creativity applied to a problem, which is what we're talking about here. We're talking about solving a problem your ministry faces all the time in a way that everybody understands how to solve it, so you can focus on those problems that don't have a system, because ministry's messy. And, so what are the things that you're constantly having to work on? What are the things that you're constantly going back to redo and undo? You need a system, and you need to get creative and solve or innovative.
And I think, we can kind of pit systems and structures up against just good old fashioned relational youth
Absolutely.
ministry, right? Like, man, that's been lost in this conversation. But to me, they are hand in glove.
Yep.
You don't want one without the other, because systems will kill your youth ministry if it's all about the system,
Right.
And it's not about the people behind it. And why do we have these systems? Because we love teenagers, right? And we want as many of them to experience the love of Jesus as possible. So we're putting some systems in place to help us stay on track.
Right.
We're going to automate what can be automated, so we can focus on that which can't be.
Right.
Because there
Teenager, right? I mean,
Wait, say that again, because that was good.
automate what can be automated,
Yep.
so we can focus on what's important, those things that can't be automated, relationships.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Because I think there is, especially for, young youth leaders that are stepping into a role, volunteer, full-time, whatever, there's this desire to be authentic. There's this desire to, to be focused on the relationships and to come off genuine and all of those different pieces. And I think that there's this fear that, one of the things that we talk in ministry about is, do for one that you wish you could do for many. And so there's this tension that you have to live in between that, and that's not a system that you can structure a ministry around as you individually as a leader. And so what's the tension between being able to do that when you're able to, but at the same point, being able to set all of your volunteers up for success, to be able to set up for that kid who you don't even know who's going to come visit in 3 weeks, set them up to get connected and to build some relationships and to set up a long-term relationship with the church.
You're using the right verb, set them up for success, but what you can't do is systematize and guarantee success, not with a relationship, right?
Well, and one of the things I say to our team all the time is hardly anything awesome happens by accident. Hardly anything amazing happens by chance. So you might luck into something every now and then, but the structures, what those do is you're kind of like, it's the foundation. You're setting yourself up for awesome to happen. You're putting the pieces in place. Awesome follow-up doesn't happen without some structure. Awesome attention to detail doesn't happen without some structure. Awesome parent ministry doesn't happen without some structure. It doesn't just show up on your doorstep. You got a structure for the awesome that you want.
Right. I have so many people say, well, I'm creative. I like to wait till the last minute. And I think it's the system, like especially with what's your system for creating a talk or what's your system for, creating a program. And they're like, well, I really want to let the Spirit work. I'm like, well, like the Spirit can't work during planning. Like the Spirit can work all the time. And if you give yourself a system, it's actually the system that will allow you to have a last minute idea.
Right.
Which makes a really good idea better. It's, when you don't have a system, you're just doing your first idea.
Right.
All the time.
I think maybe something a lot of youth leaders struggle with is a lot of times we don't think about systems and structures until there's a crisis or when we're experiencing the growing pain. And all of a sudden it's like, I need more volunteers to come to camp with me right now because a lot more kids signed up for camp than I had prepared for, that I had created a system for. And all of a sudden we start operating out of reactive mode rather than the proactive mode, where proactive mode would be more like, this is where we're going to go. We don't need you. We want to invite you to be part of something, And so it's like having to switch gears and thinking about it when you don't actually need it yet, which is, I think, the problem because there's so many things on the plate of a youth leader.
Yeah.
And it's really hard to catch up to get ahead.
Yeah, so let's see if this analogy makes any sense. Unless you're planting a church where you've got time ahead of time to build all these systems, to set all these things up, essentially you're in your ministry and it's, to kind of use the building a house sort of metaphor that we've kind of talked about a little bit. In youth ministry, it's always raining. There's flood, there's flood water coming in, and you're trying to build a structure at the same time. And so what are some of the first kind of tangible steps that we can encourage somebody to take to begin to build those structures in the midst of the rain and the tyranny of the urgent and all those things that are going on?
Find a mentor. Somebody that is further down the road than you, that's doing it, that can help coach you and wrestle through some of the tensions you're feeling. I think that was such a huge thing for me.
And I would just encourage people to embrace the reality of parallel tracks. I mean, almost everything in life is parallel tracks. So, you could say it was the best year of my life, the worst year of my life. Well, that can't be. Well, my dad died, but I got married. Worst year of my life, best year of my life. And those have to somehow coexist. In a way, what you described, there's no way to turn off either of those.
Right.
They both have to exist simultaneously on parallel tracks. You somehow, I'm not sure if there's a science to it. So much of this is art.
Yeah.
You got to do the dance. But you somehow have to learn to exist on the parallel tracks of putting a tarp over and bailing out the rain and building the foundation. You have to somehow develop your leaders and set your check-in system in place on the same week that a student ran away from home.
Yeah.
Because they both have to keep moving along.
So sometimes it's just being intentional with your week and your schedule and blocking time off to say, hey, I know this is going on. I'm going to do that. But right now, I've got to create some systems.
Well, again, leadership, right, is a vocation. You've got to work on it and you have to work in it. And you have to set work on it time for yourself. And again, the work in it may happen because there could be an emergency and it will get canceled, right? But if you don't set that time to work on it, you're never going to work on it. So you have to stop. And of course, like I said, it gets run over, but you've got to set time to work on it. I call it white space on my calendar, and I just put 3 to 4 hours of white space, and it gets eaten up all the time. But at least there's a couple hours where I step back, and it's like I'm not going to get anything done. I'm going to think about just what we do and how we can do it better.
Balcony time is the way that I was taught to think about that.
That's a good way.
Where I can get up, I can get out of things, I can have a different perspective on what's going on, to not have those things on my the tyranny of the urgent stuff that it's going to have to get done at some point.
In California, we call it basement time. Where we can just kind of go down in the basement, hunker down, surrounded by cinder blocks, and just think.
I'm from Pittsburgh. Blue collar, we build things. And so for me, it was such a hard transition for me. And I still have I get to the end of a day, and if I don't have something to show for my work, meaning I just thought about how to do things better, I feel guilty like I didn't get anything done. But the reality is I got lots done, and that's important stuff for my team, for what we're trying to do, for, progress.
So as we wrap up this conversation, some of the things that I'm hearing are, our systems and our structure are really going to define a lot of the success that we have in ministry. That there are a lot of other things that go along with that, but for that not to be a flash in the pan, or hey, we had a great year, didn't we? We had a great 3-year run. Wasn't that great? So to set up that long-term success like we all want to have in ministry, whether we're at the same church for 20 years or not, we want that church to have some long-term success. And so for us to set that up, we've got to build some of these structures that aren't dependent on our personalities or just the relational aspect that we hope that it's happening between small group leaders and students.
I mean, if you step back and think about what your ministry has to get done during the week, and maybe that's a great way to start. Just start putting, on a whiteboard, just start writing out the jobs and then color coding them, and you'll basically come up with a few piles. I think those piles there's the program that needs to happen, there's the logistics that need to happen. We got to figure out who has a peanut allergy and who needs a special meal at camp and all that good stuff. And then there's the volunteers who are in your ministry that you need to be thinking about, and how you might separate that as you grow, or how many folks you need. Again, that can be staff, that can be volunteers. Those are the things that need to get done. Again, those may be all your job right now, but there's the program, there are your volunteers, they're the logistics of what needs to get done. And as you start there, I feel like you can kind of get started.
Yeah. I think that's good. I think, it's really about multiplying yourself as a leader, and preparing your ministry for growth really is going to be about getting people in place in order to take things off of your plate so you can be thinking about the ministry. And I think that goes hand in hand with what you just said, Chef. Figure out what pools of people, where do you need leaders, and then that will trickle down into more and more people getting involved in that area.
Yeah, and my closing thought would be the tension, the parallel tracks, whatever, of you can't live without structure in youth ministry, but don't let it kill you. Because control is kind of
Kill relationship.
and it kills growth.
Yeah.
Too much control can kill growth. And so part of your role as a leader is to you ebb and flow, and you go, hey, is this a season where we need more structure to get to where God wants this thing to go? Or is this a season for us, man, God's doing something. There's something that's kind of happening outside of our structure. We couldn't plan for it. Well, don't try too hard, too quickly to contain that and to quantify it and box it in. It might be a season to just see what God's doing, and then you can kind of structure accordingly a little bit later on. So be careful not to kill growth through overstructure.
It's good.
Awesome. Well, everybody, thank you guys so much for joining us for the Rethinking Youth Ministry podcast. And if you enjoyed today's episode, we would love for you to subscribe. However you listen to podcasts, leave us a review. Let us know how we're doing, what we're doing well, how we can make this podcast better, more helpful for you. And finally, for more great resources, to check out some show notes for the episode, to learn more about the student curriculum and the strategy that we're a part of at Orange, or what Kurt is doing out at Saddleback, we would love for you to visit rethinkingrym.org. And until next time, I'm Brett.
I'm Ashley.
I am Chef.
And I'm Kurt.
Thank you guys for joining us.